Hi everyone, we're here today to talk to you about the physical consequences of nursing home abuse and neglect. And we're so lucky we have Nikkis Gray with us today. She's a senior associate here. She's been with us for almost 7 years, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about finding the signs of abuse and neglect by really diving into the medical records and hearing your loved one's story. So Nikki, thanks for being with us today. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you made it to us.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for having me. I really do appreciate it. Well, I started off in law and was an attorney, and I eventually made a move to nursing, and I worked as a nurse for about 3 to 4 years. I generally did some psych nursing, that was my main area. But of course, with psych nursing, our clients and our residents that came to the facilities don't just come with mental health issues. There's always a medical aspect to it. So even though I was doing psych nursing, we did come across lots of medical conditions that also play into a person's general well-being.
Can you tell us a little bit about how your experience in nursing and the law, you're licensed in New York, how that helps you help our clients better?
Oh, definitely. And I think it definitely does help our clients and helps me understand the medical records a lot. Just looking at the medical records and from a nursing aspect, looking at medical records, I'm able to take a look and see what nursing staff should have done in a situation and in the care of our clients' loved ones. There are certain standards of nursing care that should be provided by nursing staff. And when you review medical records, it's usually pretty easy to see where nursing staff maybe didn't quite meet that standard of care that's required of them. And unfortunately, in reviewing medical records as well, we see how them not meeting that standard of care leads to injuries to our loved ones. And unfortunately, some of these injuries can be potentially serious and very life-threatening and have, in some cases, resulted in death.
When we're talking about these injuries, what are some of the basic injuries that you see?
The large majority of injuries that we see are pressure wounds, also known as pressure ulcers, decubitus ulcers, and commonly known as bed sores.
Is this something that can be very serious?
It definitely can be very serious, and it can be very serious because a bed sore may start off as something that is very minor, something that can be healed, but if it is left untreated and if it is left without the care that it requires from nursing staff, from physicians, it can lead to infections. Those infections can lead to something so severe as sepsis, and they can lead to death. And it's always good to catch pressure sores in the very early stages when they can be healed, because in some cases they do get to a stage in a place where healing is just not an option anymore.
So when we're talking about these pressure injuries, bed sores, how do those happen, and how do those result from any type of abuse or neglect?
So pressure injuries, pressure wounds, I think for this segment we'll call them pressure wounds, result because of pressure. Our loved ones go into facilities because they've had a stroke and they're immobile and they just need some rehabilitation, or they've had a hip fracture and they're in the facility for rehabilitation. Because of those types of medical conditions in their history, it makes them more at risk for developing pressure wounds because they are immobile, or they're less mobile than they used to be. They're not able to move themselves about in bed. They're not able to change positions in chairs when they've been sitting in a wheelchair for a long time. And so pressure wounds result because there's constant pressure being applied to the skin. And the skin is supplied by small blood vessels that deliver oxygen, that deliver nutrients to the skin in order to nourish it and essentially keep it plump. And when constant pressure is being applied and In the medical and nursing field, it's pressure of greater than 2 hours. So if somebody's sitting for more than 2 hours and not moving and changing position and offloading some of that pressure, as that pressure is constantly applied, the skin doesn't get all the nutrients and oxygen that it would need to get supplied by those little blood vessels that are essentially been compressed and essentially squished. And so at that point, the skin begins to break down due to essentially starvation. The skin is not getting the nutrients and oxygen that it needs.
So the skin is basically dying from that pressure.
Essentially, yes, it's dying. And as it's dying, the skin opens up and a wound begins to form.
What are nursing homes supposed to do? What is the standard that they're required to follow when it comes to preventing or healing pressure wounds?
So the Nursing Home Reform Act places a burden on nursing homes to ensure that if a resident enters a facility with no pressure wounds and no skin breakdown, then that resident must remain in that state of not having any pressure wounds. The Nursing Home Reform Act also places a burden on nursing homes that if a resident does enter the facility with some form of skin breakdown, then the nursing home has a duty to make sure that that is healed.
So when we're talking about these pressure wounds, there are various stages that we talk about, and I think those are a little bit complicated to understand. Could you talk to us a little bit about the various stages of pressure wounds and why it's important to note those stages and keep track of them and provide as much notice as possible when those happen?
So there are 4 stages of a pressure wound. Stages 1, 2, 3, and 4, and there's also another stage that we often see in the medical record that is unstageable. In stage 1, the skin is red. It almost shows like a little bruise. Depending on your pigmentation, it may not be red, it may be a darker color. But at that stage, the skin is closed, there's no open wound.
So with stage 1, there is a high likelihood that the nursing home and the caregivers can really take action to heal these wounds. Is that right?
That is correct.
All right. So then the next stages that we get to, are those a little bit more serious?
The second stage of pressure wounds, stage 2 pressure wounds, I almost liken to when we were kids and were running around on the playground and scraped our knees. The wound kind of shows a little pinkness in the wound bed. It's a little bit open, but it's just a very, very superficial opening of the skin. At that stage 2, it's also a good thing to make sure that once you recognize that your loved one has a stage 2 pressure wound that has developed, get with their care team and find out exactly what they are doing to make sure that they prevent the further deterioration of that wound and try and get that to heal.
What if the nursing home is saying this is, not a big deal, this happens all the time, this is a normal occurrence? What should someone do?
I would find a way to speak to the director of nursing and make sure that you are attending care plan meetings for your loved one if they are in a skilled nursing facility or nursing home, and make sure you're attending those care plan meetings and making sure that you actually insist that they put in place interventions to prevent the further deterioration of a stage 2 pressure wound.
Because that's what they're required to do.
That is what they are required to do. They're required to, first of all, when your loved one enters the facility, they're required to do a risk assessment to see how at risk your loved one is for developing pressure wounds. There's several factors that go into the risk and how a person is at risk for pressure wounds. How much they eat, how much they drink, are they at risk for nutritional deficits? Are they able to move themselves in bed? Is there a risk of them trying to move themselves in bed and developing friction, as against their skin as they're trying to move up in bed? So there are several factors that go into those assessments, and so risk assessments definitely do need to be done when your loved one enters the facility.
So then we were talking about the different stages of the pressure wounds. We've talked about stage 1 and stage 2. There is also a stage 3 and stage 4 pressure wound, right?
That is correct. So for stage 3, we now have an open wound. It kind of dug into more of the skin, and it's a little bit deeper. And now we actually have the pressure wound that involves the subcutaneous layer and the fat layer of the skin. And with stage 4 pressure wounds, the wound has gone down to involving some of the muscle, and in some cases we sadly see bone sticking out of those pressure wounds. And at that stage, if you've got bone, we've got open wounds, we've got bone exposed. Some of that bone can get infected, and it's very difficult to treat those and come back from that.
And then if infection sets into the bone, it's a life-threatening condition.
This is a life-threatening condition. With any infection that can set into those wounds, our elderly populations and our loved ones can develop sepsis, which is extremely life-threatening.
How should someone act? What should they do if they see a pressure wound, or if they notice some signs that the skin condition is breaking down, or if there are any kind of odors, or I guess talk to us a little bit about the signs and symptoms of pressure wounds that maybe not everyone would know.
So for some of the signs and symptoms of pressure wounds, for our elderly populations who maybe have dementia, Alzheimer's, who are not able to express the fact that they have something going on, families may find that their loved one is maybe paying more attention to something going on their back, their heel, their hips. They may be scratching there more often, or experiencing pain there and kind of just rubbing that area and just showing a symptom that they are experiencing pain. It's always a good idea to see what's going on.
See for yourself.
See for yourself, exactly. Inspect their skin. If you are able to, take a picture of it and just monitor its progress. Even when it's a stage 1 pressure wound, just monitor its progress. Make sure that you're speaking to the nursing staff about what interventions they have in place. The biggest one that they should be doing for your loved one in a nursing home is making sure that they are turning and repositioning your loved one at least every 2 hours.
And then when it comes to a situation to where they're asking for help, nobody is really paying attention to this wound and it's not getting any better, what can they do?
There are several advocacy groups that they can contact. One is the Long-Term Care Ombudsman. They can contact the ombudsman in their area, and I think that the number is provided on the bottom of the screen, as well as making a call to your Health and Human Services Department for your state.
And then that will hopefully initiate an investigation so that your loved one can get the help that they need.
That is correct. And in most cases, of course, if you feel like your loved one is in serious danger of a pressure wound developing into infection, or if you are seeing signs where your loved one is not acting as they normally would, I think in the medical records it's called altered mental status. If they're looking like they're just not quite themselves and they're not able to identify you, their speech is very slurred, and they're just acting the way that's out of the normal for them. If you feel like your loved one is at risk of a very serious infection being developed, definitely speak to the facility about sending your loved one to a higher level of care to be evaluated, sending them to the hospital to be evaluated, just to make sure that a pressure wound is not severe enough to where there's an infection and sepsis developing.
And even call 911 if you can't get the help that you need.
Exactly.
All right, Nikki, thank you so much. We hope we've provided you with some information so that you're better armed to care for your loved one. And I really thank you for taking the time to walk us through this so that we can really help everyone determine the best course of action if they do see any type of injuries on their loved one. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.